Wars collectors, and welcome to another Bossk Bounty video. Welcome to episode 77 of Ask Bossk Bounty. This is of course the weekly series that drops every Sunday where I answer your questions. So if you do have a questions for next week's episode, the place to leave them is in the comment section below. I think I had a record number of questions from last week's episode, so thank you so much for the amount of questions. It was seriously overwhelming. I've had to pick a few, and also I have picked a few from my Patreon supporters as well, because that is part of the perks of being a Patreon supporter. You get to be featured on Ask Bossk Bounty. So as I said, we've got a jam-packed episode this week, so if you do happen to enjoy the video, don't forget to drop a like down below, and if you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button. I'm nearly at 16,000 subscribers, which is pretty unbelievable. So, and even if you are a regular viewer of this channel and you haven't subscribed, it would really do me a big favour to hit that subscribe button and join the community. And with all that being said, let's get straight on to the first question. And the first question is from Patreon supporter Matthew Neef, and he says, "Hey buddy, what are your thoughts on the last 17? Even though prices have gone ridiculously high, do you at least have your sights set on any one figure to add to the wall? All the best, man." Well, Matthew, in terms of the last 17 figures, I'm never going to be able to afford any of those carded, so they wouldn't really go on the wall. But in terms of the cabinet, where I do have my loose vintage Star Wars collection, these are the ones here that I have from the last 17. Of course, a lot of the last 17 are Ewoks, and as you can see, Romba is nice and safe and sound now, back from the police cells after his misdemeanor at the rave. But obviously we've got Lumat, we have Warwick, we have Paplu and Romba. They are all part of the last 17, and then I've got the Luke Skywalker in his Stormtrooper outfit. Absolutely awesome figure. The others, they're just so expensive. They have gone crazy. I mean, Warwick, I remember buying him last year in maybe November. I think I paid £80 for him, which was expensive back then. He now goes for £200 on the Facebook groups. Absolutely crazy. If you're looking at EV99 without the leg falling off or the arm falling off, or a man, they are just crazy prices. But one day I will get them. It's just a case of biding your time and finding the right time to hit that deal. Nino Brown says, question for next week. Building on your previous Cantina comment, what is holding back the release of a Cantina playset or playsets in the vintage collection? I can easily see 2 or 3 sets similar to the recent Jabba's Palace, which would combine to complete the set. Great opportunity to include the odd unreleased character. You are my go-to source for Star Wars vintage collection. Appreciate what you do. Thank you very much, Nino. I do appreciate that, my friend. Now, I think what the hold-up is the fact that the figures aren't there. I mean, I know they have released playsets in the past where we haven't really got all of the figures already, but I think with the Cantina, it's a little bit different. Some of the figures are very old now in the modern line, going back to 2006 Saga collection, and they're just not up to today's standards. So if they were to release a Cantina playset or playsets, people would be up in arms, because essentially you'd only have like Dr. Evazan, Walrus Man and a few others, and some of these super rare ones from the Legacy collection you'd need, but also Hasbro would have to, completely redo some figures, and I just don't think they're going to do that, because although we love them as collectors, I don't think they think that these background blink and you'll miss them characters sell well in mass at retail. Paul Robotnik says, question for next week. I'm Star Wars collector that's just recently started watching your channel, and I think you're doing a great job. Thank you very much, Paul. I was wondering, do you think that they will reissue any of the creatures from the past waves, and what is your favourite creature figure in the lines? So I think the only creature that we've had in the actual vintage collection is the Tauntaun. Not this one here, that one's the vintage Tauntaun, but I do have the other one. But man, there's so many, isn't there? I mean, I'd love them to do a Wampa. We could do with another Rancor in the vintage collection in a vintage style box. Of course, you've got new ones like the Blurg, Dewback from the Mandalorian. There's so many that they could do. And it was a question that I posed to Hasbro at the recent Q&A. I mentioned creatures specifically because that's something that I would love. And I think it would diversify the line. Collectors would go nuts over them. Their answer as usual is that, it's on their minds and they can't reveal anything for the future. But let's wait and see. I think the one that we could really do with is the Blurg, because we've got all these Mandalorian figures. We're getting the Razor Crest. They've got to give us the Blurg. Patreon supporter Daniel Boswell says, are there any vintage knockoff Star Wars figures that you either have in your collection or would love to add? I don't know whether you mean like bootlegs or something, like Polish bootlegs or something. That's not really something that I'm into. I know the action figure grader, my mate John, he's really into that kind of stuff, like knockoff figures from the Eastern Bloc back in the day. They're not really my cup of tea. The only sort of knockoff figure that I have is the Russian Oratet Bossk. It's not a vintage one though, it's from the Power of the Force. I can't show you it now, the pink Bossk, because he's at the grading house. I'm waiting for him to come back. Marshall says, question for next week. Do you think we'll be getting an updated Tuscan Raider figure in the vintage collection anytime soon, and or a sandcrawler? Man, I'd love a sandcrawler. That'd be flipping awesome, especially if it's done in the HasLab, you know, at grand scale. It'd be so good. In terms of the Tuscan Raider, he is one of those figures from the Vintage Saga collection that needs to be brought forward into the vintage collection for that proper main line with a vintage collection number. They've done that recently with the Endor layer that's going to be happening. So as far as Hasbro are concerned, they don't class the Vintage Saga collection and Vintage Original Trilogy collection as vintage collection because they're bringing them forward. So he is definitely one that needs to be revisited. He definitely needs new arms. He's got the swivel arms, and they repacked him into the Black Series red and black boxes and kept the swivel arms. So he's definitely one that needs doing. I couldn't tell you when they're going to do that, my friend, but it's definitely one that they need to do. Ovi Bankanobi says, question for next week. My number one wish for the vintage collection would be a new version of the Death Star briefing room set with figures that can actually sit down. But does the 3.75-inch line have a definitive sculpt for the Imperial Officers? If not, Hasbro should create one, and they would immediately have all the high-ranking Imperials by just varying paint and head sculpt. I am 1,000,000% with you, my friend. I think I mentioned this before when I had a question about General Veers and the Imperial Attack Commander. Essentially, give us a new version of General Veers with an all-new sculpt for the Imperial Officer. They can do like they did with the Black Series with Veers and give him his armour as well so that he can become that Attack Commander. But underneath, he would just be a standard Imperial Officer, which, as you say, they could just repaint, give new heads to. It would be flipping awesome. We could have Admiral Piet. We could have Ozil. There'd be so many that we could have. Patreon supporter Gerard Cantor says, if you could pick a playset that Hasbro would theoretically make to coincide with the upcoming year celebrating the anniversary of Rogue One, what would it be? I'm torn between a tall playset mimicking the Citadel or a cutaway of the Yavin hangar where you could park an X-Wing, etc. Yeah, I like the second idea. That'd be awesome. I think the Citadel, as you say, would be a pretty big playset. I kind of think they could do something maybe quite simple with like maybe one of the bunkers from that Citadel area on Scarif. That would be pretty awesome. They could accessorize it with barrels and crates and things like that. And essentially it'd give our heroes and the Scarif Stormtroopers and Death Troopers a place to have a scrap. So that's one that I think they could do. You know, just a nice bunker with the sliding doors. That would do me. Nothing too extreme, but, you know, maybe a $40 price point, something like that. Martin Footer says, question for next week. What does your partner think of your hobby? You'd have to ask her, really, for the honest answer, I think. But, you know, she doesn't really mind it. It doesn't get in the way of her everyday life, apart from the odd cardboard box that's in the lounge when it shouldn't be. I am trying to arrange to extend the house up into the loft because we're in a bungalow at the moment, which would give me more space and my own bigger collection room. But essentially, she doesn't really get involved. I mean, she's always known that I've been into Star Wars ever since I met her. I had Star Wars figures on my desk and things like that at home, so it's always been there. So, you know, she kind of knew what she was getting herself into at the start. Blockade Runner 77 says, since the revamp of the vintage collection in 2018, the least released movie on a card back has been Revenge of the Sith with the Walmart exclusive 41st Elite Clone Trooper. Do you think Hasbro will create new, reissue any more Revenge of the Sith figures? And if so, who do you think they will reissue or create? Cheers. That's quite interesting, actually. I hadn't really sort of noticed that this one here is the only figure that we've had from Revenge of the Sith since it came back, which is absolutely crazy. I'm trying to think of any of the reissues that have been Revenge of the Sith, and I don't think there has been, have there? But I think that's possibly a sign of the fact that, you know, Hasbro tend to make stuff that's, you know, current. So Mandalorian's going crazy at the moment. They always go back to the OT. But in terms of Revenge of the Sith, you know, there's nothing really happening with it. There's nothing to make them think that we want figures from Revenge of the Sith at this moment in time. Maybe when the anniversary comes along that they will do something. I don't know. They haven't had a great history around doing anniversaries in the vintage collection. But we are getting a bit more Rogue One this year for the 5th anniversary. So maybe, you never know. And obviously Attack of the Clones anniversaries next year. You never know, maybe they're going to start, you know, giving us a bit more for those anniversaries, and let's hope so. In terms of reissues, you know, we've talked about this before. There's so many figures that we would prefer other than Peasant Anakin and Queen Amidala. You know, I'm sure collectors, for example, from Revenge of the Sith would love the Commander Cody figure. the Commander Gree, the General Grievous figure, the list goes on. Wyatt Taylor says, hey Bossk, loving the content recently. Question for next week, which armour design for Boba do you like more? The old, more battle damaged armour from the original trilogy, or the cleaned up, repainted armour from The Mandalorian? Cheers, Bossk. I've got to be honest, I do prefer the OT era Boba Fett, if I'm honest, but saying that, when you first saw him in The Mandalorian after he'd repainted the armour, he did look super cool. But I wouldn't worry at all. We're going to be getting that figure from the Book of Boba Fett. It's just no doubt about it. We will definitely be getting that. That will probably be the first figure you get from the Book of Boba Fett, is Boba Fett himself. All right then, so we've got 3 similar questions, all from my Patreon supporters, about the May the 4th reveals. So we have Adam Lynch, who says, g'day Tim, is there any rumours of Vintage Collection releases on the 4th of May? Cheers. We have Gary Moore says, similar to Adam's question, what reveals do you anticipate or are hoping for the next Hasbro FanFest on May the 4th? And Stuart Norris says, hey Tim, with May the 4th coming up at the Hasbro FanFest, what are the chances of the first 12 figures being released in the Vintage Collection as part of the 50th anniversary of Lucasfilm? So I'll address that one first. 12 figures, I'm not sure. I would love it, mate, if they did that, but I think that's a bit of a stretch. It would be a good time to do it on May the 4th, wouldn't it? But never say never, but I really don't think. What I'm hoping for May the 4th is that we get, hopefully, another glimpse at a Rogue One figure, perhaps, maybe one of the new ones. Hopefully Baze Malbus or Bodhi Rook would be pretty awesome. I think there's going to be 3 more 50th anniversary figures coming out. Love to know what those ones are. Of course, we know about Paplu, Leia and the AT-ST driver, but it'd be great to see what those other 3 are. And as Gary Moore says, a speeder bike for either The Mandalorian or Return of the Jedi. I don't really mind which, but it would be really good to get another vehicle lined up for this year. And Patreon supporter Bill Polk says, May the 4th, worldwide official holiday, yes or no? Absolutely yes. I mean, come on, any chance to have another day off work? Absolutely. I would not say no at all. Ari Perzolomsky says, question for next week, do you think that the 20th anniversary of Attack of the Clones, Hasbro could do a huge Vintage Collection Geonosis arena? I would love it if they would do that. I can't see them doing that myself. I hope they do. I mean, it would be awesome. But for the anniversary of Attack of the Clones, I could possibly see them maybe doing something like they've been doing with Rogue One this year, where we get a few of the figures, maybe 4, 5, 6 figures from Attack of the Clones, which would be awesome. Count Dooku, anybody? He would be a fantastic figure. I mean, if there was ever a year that you were going to give us Count Dooku, it would be the 20th anniversary of Attack of the Clones. So come on, Hasbro. Sort it out. Patreon supporter Josh Butt says, with the awesome news of new figures in the Clone Wars packaging, do you think Hasbro is starting to make a shift towards fan and collector desires more than traditional marketing and merchandising? Do you think we could finally see an increase in volume of figures released each year if they follow this trend? Well, I think there's definitely been a shift towards collectors. I mean, the only lines that they really have left are the Vintage Collection and the Black Series, which are 2 collector-focused lines. You've got the Vintage Collection with the sort of nostalgic side of it, and then you've got the high premium Black Series figures for, display purposes rather than play features. So both of those lines are collector-focused lines, which is possibly why we've seen sort of less creatures and play sets and vehicles than we would have done previously. Do I think that'll increase the volume? I doubt it, to be honest. If anything, it has decreased, because if the market has shrunk, less people are buying it, then they'll create less. But this is what the campaigns have been all about, to say that we're still here as like adult collectors and we want them to pump out more, and hopefully they do that. Wolf Reviews says, question for next week, Boss, do you think Hasbro will release prequel style ships, vehicles, playsets, and would you consider ever making a gaming channel? So yeah, I think I've been discussing prequel era stuff, Revenge of the Sith and Attack of the Clones, and for me, I think for them to release those types of items, there needs to be some kind of anniversary. Otherwise, it's just not current enough for them to do so. That's just a proven fact, with the fact that we've only got the one Revenge of the Sith figure since, the lines come back. Would I consider making a gaming channel? No, I'm not a massive gamer. I play the Star Wars games and a bit of Call of Duty and what have you, but my gaming days are kind of over. 10, 15 years ago, I was a huge gamer with the Xbox 360, and if there was ever going to be a time that I'll do a channel, it probably would have been then. But I wouldn't have enough gaming content. I don't really know enough about it to make a channel. And finally, Patreon supporter Jeep077 says, when do you believe they will release a Darth Vader's TIE Fighter in the Vintage Collection, and would you be willing to pay a higher price for it if it had authentic movie sounds like the Smuggler's Run Falcon? The answer to that, my friend, is that I really don't know when they will do that. It's one of those ones where I think they'll have to do an all-new sculpt for it, which means we'll probably be waiting a bit longer for it. But man, I would love it if they did that. It's a huge omission from the vehicles that we currently have in the vintage collection. The Darth Vader's TIE Fighter is one that I've mentioned so many times on people's live streams and everything when they've, done fun things like, name one vehicle that you would love the vintage collection to do. That's always up there along with the speeder bike. In terms of authentic movie sounds, that side of things doesn't really concern me. I'd rather it just look good with decent weathering on it and stuff rather than have gimmicky sounds. That's the least requirement for me. I don't really care about that sort of thing. As I say, it's all to do with how it looks on display and, some of the features that it has rather than sounds. All right then, guys, that's it for this week's episode. Thank you very much for your questions. Be sure to leave your questions for next week's episode in the comment section below. Thank you very much for watching as usual, and we shall see you on the next one.